Welcome to another episode of TrueNAS Tech Talk. On today's episode, we're in code freeze for Fangtooth RC1. We're going to get into the differences between treating TrueNAS as an appliance versus, say, a distro, new functionality for apps, and more of your viewer questions, more than we can handle in 1 week. So keep them coming. We love it.
Yep, absolutely. Keep those questions coming. I know some of you have sent in some long form questions. We might try to break some of those up into multi-parts again, but we'll hopefully be able to continue answering these as we go.
Yeah, we reserve the right to edit and paraphrase to our heart's content here. So
yeah,
deal with it.
Mostly for brevity. We don't want to take away any of your content. Just I can't spend 5 minutes reading a long form question. That's all it is.
Absolutely.
All right. So hey, code freeze for Fangtooth RC1, Kris.
Yeah, let's get into that. So that was a quick window. We're going straight from beta, rolling right into RC1. So code freeze, what that means internally, that's a deadline for the engineering team. We want to hit a certain date where we've merged all the major work that needs to go into the next release. And now it's off to the software QA team to go do their testing. You know, we do a little more polishing, fix a few bugs, all that good stuff to get it ready for you and the public to download and start playing with next. So now that we've kicked off the testing internally this next week, we're looking at an anticipated release date of around March 11th. That's the date on the calendar. Again, take it with a grain of salt. That assumes testing goes well and all that.
Yep. Subject to change.
Any issues, subject to change. Absolutely. So we'll see how that goes. But so far, it's looking pretty good internally. I'm running all my systems on the beta and really eager to get RC on that box and those couple boxes and have some fun with it. But this release, the RC is usually pretty close to what the final is going to look like. By RC, we consider it feature frozen. Everything's kind of locked in and baked. So if you are curious or want to test, this is probably a great point to jump in, do some testing, get us that feedback. If you see any bugs or breaking or especially regressions, those are the things that are most egregious. We want to have an opportunity to address those before the .0 goes out the door. So again, keep that feedback coming in. That's super important.
Yeah, and RC does stand for release candidate. So the idea is it should be pretty close to a final release. So there's lots of polishes and tweaks in here for sure in the RC version.
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest area I think they got tweaks, though, is going to be, of course, the new VM and Incus support, the instances section of the UI. I mentioned last week, but some of the work for PCIe Passthrough has started to land, and the ability to switch between NVMe and various VirtIO disk emulation modes, that's going in as well. That's important because a lot of folks trying to install VMs are doing Windows. And without that option, you have to go and roll your own custom Windows ISO that has the VirtIO drivers and all that jazz, which is a little annoying and tedious if you don't have access to the tools easily. So
yeah, we saw some people mentioning lots of stuff in the threads about, rolling your own ISO and complications with secure boot when you try to add the TPM module to your Windows VMs, things like that. So this should hopefully mitigate a lot of that.
Yep. So we're going to get that into the RC. And again, looking forward to getting some new feedback from folks when they start trying it. So it's going to be a fun couple of weeks. Buckle up. This is an exciting time in TrueNAS land.
Exactly. But if you're one of those people who is not necessarily running the VMs or the instances, if you just use your TrueNAS system for storage and, maybe some of the apps pieces and not the instances, I have a feeling you're going to be really, really satisfied with the RC. Everything is very, very rock stable for my usage there. I admit I don't use too much of the instances and the VMs on my TrueNAS itself. It's mostly in experimental context there, but I definitely use it for a lot of storage, and I definitely use the apps piece.
Well, and the way things work these days with TrueNAS is most of the existing functionality stays pretty stable. So again, if you're not trying out the new functionality or features, you may upgrade and go, oh, this is kind of boring. That's a good thing. Upgrades should not be exciting.
Yeah, you want your
unless
upgrades,
you're trying to use new features.
You want your upgrades to be boring in the best way possible, right?
Absolutely. So that's all going to be happening. Again, I'm running the beta at this point. It feels like a release as well for all my traditional NAS functionality. It's just works. So anywho, hopefully that's your experience as well. And we look forward to getting more people trying it out and hopefully telling us that's what they're seeing. And if not, give us a chance to fix it. Absolutely. But as a side note, another kind of big thing we've been working on in the background is we have a massive pull request up on GitHub opened up for our apps catalog. This is eventually going to expose the options to all the applications to allow you to select a specific IP address to bind to for port forwarding. That's been a feature we've wanted to get in for some time. A lot of folks have asked for that. Essentially how it'll work is in TrueNAS, if you go add new IP aliases, so add more statics, you can then go and bind specific apps to those and do specific rules which is a good thing. I actually use that myself internally. That's good. We're looking at enabling this though for the whole catalog around June 1st. So you may ask, well, geez, that's a long time away still. Why are you waiting so long? So the reason for the long wait time is we're trying to get Fangtooth out into the wild long enough for folks to upgrade first. Why? Well, one of the issues is when we merge this into the apps tree, users that are still running Electric Eel are going to get an error when they try and upgrade to the newer version of those applications automatically. They're going to see your TrueNAS version is too old type message when you hit the upgrade button, which is very annoying, and we don't want to do that to a lot of folks. So we want to give enough time for users to get an opportunity to upgrade to Fangtooth first and get the bulk of the fleet moved over to that before we flip that knob and turn it on for everyone. Now, for those who still are on Electric Eel, you're not completely out of luck when we do make that switch. You'll still have an option. You could always delete and reinstall the app, and then you'll automatically be switched to the new version. You won't get that migration error. Life will go on. You can keep your persistent data, all that good stuff, or you can just upgrade to Fangtooth and make it easy that way too. But that's still annoying to do so. So we'd like to avoid a lot of people hitting that problem and, all the complaints on the forums and Reddit. So again, we'll take our time. June 1st, keep an eye out. We'll, of course, give you a heads up before that gets pushed into the wild here on the podcast, sometime shortly before that happens. But good
by
feature.
That point, we may even have a point release on top of Fangtooth as well. We might be on a .1. Who knows? Yeah,
it will be at .1 point at that date. So it should be in good shape. I think most folks will have already upgraded and feel it's stable enough to do so. Again, I'm running the beta, and at this point, it's hard to find things where it's not stable on the traditional NAS side. So, we'll keep an eye on it over the next couple months. Again, we'll let you know.
Absolutely. Hey, speaking of upgrades and the idea of upgrading and being an appliance versus a distro, I know you're going to get on your soapbox again here about this one, Kris. I'll try to give you some chances to take a breath in the middle of this monologue and interrupt and throw some of my own insights into there, especially from interacting with a lot of the community members on this one. So
it's a good topic, and every now and then I'll get on a soapbox so I can explain things so you get kind of a peek behind the scenes on what our thinking is on why we do certain things the way we do them in TrueNAS land. So something that's come up somewhat frequently, I've seen it on the forums, I've had conversations with people on Reddit about this, I'm sure it's been discussed in Discord, is this idea of how much TrueNAS should allow customization under the hood. Okay. So there's a lot of folks out there, a lot of fans and users, you might be listening to this show, who have decent Linux backgrounds or BSD backgrounds. They kind of know how things work in the background. And then they find themselves saying, oh, well, I want to go tweak certain knobs that we don't expose in TrueNAS directly because, I'm smarter than the average bear. I know where the conf file lives, and I know how to tweak that file or edit that config or whatever. Anyway, the kind of stuff you would do if you were running, say, Debian or FreeBSD or Red Hat or something. And I kind of want to make the point that that's probably not the way you want to think about TrueNAS, so that you can make educated decisions on how much you really want to fiddle with your storage behind the scenes. So first of all, let's just get this out there. TrueNAS is not a generic Linux or BSD distribution. Okay. It's not just because it's based or built on Debian, which a lot of things are, doesn't mean we expect you to go to the command prompt and start app doing this and app doing that and deleting this and changing systemd things. Like, that's a little risky.
The reason that we spend so much time creating all of this middleware and this wonderful web UI on top of it is so that you don't need to know how to do that. Sure, we could say, if you want to set these things, well, you got to dig into the command line, you got to make these changes, you got to recompile this, you got to add this DKMS module. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for everybody out there that's using it while balancing it with, those who really want to go further.
Absolutely. You're right. And none of this is really just generic Debian. We customize the kernel. We have custom things in ZFS. We have a lot of packages that are customized. So again, you need to change your thinking a little bit here. It's even on FreeBSD. And so maybe some folks don't know this. It was a fork of FreeBSD. It wasn't vanilla FreeBSD either. We always had our own patches and things we had to do either on the kernel side or in the user land side, because out of box FreeBSD just wasn't suitable even for FreeNAS back in the day. And none of them are, because you're building a purpose-built thing and you're just taking whatever OS of choice at the time and customizing it to build the thing you want to build. So we build it in a way where we don't expect you to have to know how to set conf file values or edit system scripts or do all the things that you would normally do at the root shell if, say, you're a traditional IT or system administrator, a Linux enthusiast. And a matter of fact, we officially don't support any of that in any way or form. Think of it as buying a car. You buy a car, you drive it off the lot, you go home, you open up the engine compartment and start swapping parts out with aftermarket things. And then you get upset when it stops working. You take it back to your dealer and then get upset again when the dealer's like, dude, we're not going to repair this. You broke it. It's not how we sold it to you, right?
Yeah.
You got to think of TrueNAS kind of the same way.
The first thing the dealer is going to say is, okay, well, put the original parts back in. You changed the camshaft, you added a new intake, you're trying to get more power to this thing, and I understand it, but we can't necessarily warranty you if you've changed all the guts of the internals here.
Absolutely.
Put it back to the way it was. And that's why we'll often say, if somebody's enabled debug mode, we don't really know what you've done under the hood. Mm-hmm. We have to look at it. And if it's something that you say, hey, there's a problem in there, we'll say, well, the key part of troubleshooting often is trying to reproduce something. And if we can't reproduce the exact changes you made, it's really, really difficult for us to reproduce that problem.
Absolutely. And granted, I realize a lot of folks out there are tech enthusiasts and hackers. Doesn't mean you can't do this. After all, the software is open source. There's tools. We provide tools so you can go and hack on the system to your heart's content. I mean, heck, you can even go build it from source code if you wanted to. It's all up on the GitHub site. It's there. That's intentional. But again, it's just about setting expectations, though. It's not something that if you're smart enough to say, ooh, I want to go tinker and fiddle and build a FrankenNAS, you can absolutely do that, but you probably shouldn't be encouraging other inexperienced folks to do this as kind of their standard fare for operating a TrueNAS. It's going to lead to a poor user experience for them if they're not up to the task of then maintaining it, forever onward. So TrueNAS is only tested and really supported when you drive it via its UI mechanisms. Again, the reason we build this pretty UI and all this wonderful backend, because there's a lot of safety rails and foot shooting prevention mechanisms, all that good stuff. Once you start turning screwdrivers under the hood, we won't support it officially any longer. That's why we intentionally don't enable things like aux parameters anymore. Back in the very early days of FreeNAS, you almost had to be kind of a Linux Unix nerd to run it because you could tell a lot of things were just passing through like functionality that went straight down to the OS, right? We didn't have all the nice knobs and all the safety belts that it probably should have had back in those days. So we're trying to get away from that now, though. The issue with aux parameters in particular, if I want to pick on that for a moment, is that people tend to say, oh, well, here's a free-form field where I can go just paste in whatever values I want that get passed to some backend tool. That could be Samba, could be NFS, could be SCSD, could be rclone, could be whatever the underlying component is you're trying to tweak. The issue is, though, and it always is what happens on upgrades. Those tools don't stay static. Those VFS modules you loaded on Samba, guess what? They're going to break you in 6 months when you try and upgrade because the new version doesn't have the same behavior. Or that rclone flag, is it the same? Or there's subtle implications of when you enable that flag, other things have to change and it breaks on upgrade. And we can't help do that for you when you go and set manual options that way.
Exactly. The challenge is a lot of the things that people will paste into those fields is they're pulling it from some reference that you might have needed to do this 5 years ago, but software moves really, really quickly. So something that was valid for you to paste into that field 5 years ago to get a necessary piece of functionality, hey, we probably integrated it into TrueNAS already.
Yeah.
There's a checkbox in the UI if you need that. And the problem is that when you throw things in there wholesale, sometimes those fields, they don't exist in the UI for a reason. You set this thing and you go, well, this is created a fun and exciting new unexpected series of behavior for my NAS.
My favorite is when somebody goes and applies those options without even testing beforehand. And then when we tell them, take the options out, it actually works just fine under the default. And then they take them out and go, oh, it does work. Yes, we're trying to make it easier where you don't have to go and fiddle with things. It should work out of box. If there's certain features or flags you do need enabled, though, we want to go handle those on a case-by-case basis. So again, hit the forums up, make a feature request. We'll look at focusing on enabling things explicitly so that A, they can be tested, and B, we can handle them properly on upgrade, because we'll just pick a hypothetical feature. You turn this knob on, we're going to go set a bunch of flags in the background, maybe for the kernel, maybe for ZFS, maybe for Samba or NFS or whatever the components might be. But because it's a knob that's explicitly enabled, on upgrade, we run things like migration scripts, which can say, oh, we're now moving to a new version of the Linux kernel or a new version of ZFS or Samba or whatever. We know the user wants this knob on, but to accomplish whatever this knob is supposed to do, we're going to set this new set of flags to the background tools to, keep the same behavior. That way you have that kind of boring upgrade experience that you want. I don't know about you guys. I don't like throwing a weekend away just to do upgrades because now I have to go investigate all the things that changed and broke. Like that gets old real fast. That's not very enterprise.
Exactly. I like my upgrades to just be, click the button, decide I'm going to reboot here, wait 5 minutes, and I'm back up and running. But you're entirely right in that the whole idea of exposing it in the UI is it's not so much I want to enable this explicit setting. It's I want this particular type of behavior. Correct. And you send that request to us in the middleware, and we handle everything that's on the back end. You say, hey, I want to expose, the SMB, the recycle bin over SMB. That's a checkbox in the UI. We'll handle everything that's in there. Yeah. If something changes in a VFS module under the hood that requires different plumbing in the Samba service, you check the box that says you want the recycle bin. It's our middleware's job to figure out the necessary knobs to turn under the hood.
Yeah, that's our job to do all the heavy lifting there, because you may also not know sometimes turning that knob on has implication to other things and other features as well. And we got to figure out all that complexity and do it right so you just have a good user experience and the feature you wanted to enable keeps on working. So anyway, like I said, a little bit of a soapbox here, but this is something that comes up frequently, and I figured it was worth addressing, at least on one episode, so we can state how it should be thought about when you go ahead and deploy your TrueNAS.
Yeah, and it's we're not picking on the Samba guys here, we promise, but it just seems like you're the most frequent ones that pop up in the community that are looking to do all these configuration changes. There's just as many weird things that people are asking for customization in NFS or iSCSI or things like that. Sure. Again, if it's something you want to see enabled there, if you have some setting you want to be able to tune, put in that feature request. I know I saw somebody asking to be able to change like the detailed iSCSI chunk transfer sizes. Hey, put in a feature request. Believe me, I've seen all those before. I know why you're trying to do them. You're playing with and optimizing, your iSCSI transfers, your discards over iSCSI. Put them in there and let's get them into the UI integrated and make them first-class features.
Absolutely. So again, work with us. We have a release cycle every 6 months, so there's always opportunities to go expose new bells and whistles and knobs to give you that kind of advanced functionality you want. Within reason, of course. Not all feature requests are created equal. And so sometimes we will have to decline some where it's like, oh, wow, you didn't think through that. Yeah, that allows you to get exploited very easily. So, we're obviously going to be a little picky on which ones we can bring in and how safe they are. But you should still put the request in, let us evaluate that, and then hopefully give you a good answer. So before we get into our audience questions, a little teaser for upcoming episodes, by the way. So we have our next guest lined up, and we're working on getting that arranged. We'll have that episode here soon, maybe next week, maybe the week after, but coming soon. And then also we're looking at doing a nice overview, kind of all things apps, containers, and VMs on TrueNAS. Now that we have Fangtooth getting ready to go out the door, we have this instances thing. There's a lot of options for running software on top of TrueNAS now. Of course, you have Docker-based apps, LXC-based Incus containers, and then, of course, your traditional KVM VMs. So we'll get into that and kind of give you a quick rundown on what all the different features are, what the backends are, and how to best mix those and use those for success, depending on what your use case is. So stay tuned to future episodes.
Absolutely. Oh, hey, let's get into the audience questions here, Kris. We got a couple of good ones coming in. The first one actually comes from yet another Kris. This is, and I apologize if I butcher your name, Kris Mierzwinski from a YouTube comment in our previous episode. He says, do you recall any feature challenge in TrueNAS scale or core development that was the toughest to implement or solve? And what's a future potential feature that will be tricky and the team is working on or maybe is yet to tackle? I mean, before you jump in, I'll just say the obvious one-word answer, the feature challenge. Docker, that was a feature challenge.
It was a challenge, especially on how to do the migration. So I'll give you a little, fun background on that. K3S and Kubernetes was by far harder than Docker. Docker was in many ways a simplification and easier, and it just works and it's stable and well understood and all that. But it was a challenge in that we decided to do it and we had to do it in a one release cycle. We needed to move quick. And then doing the migrations from Kubernetes presented a whole series of challenges as well. So definitely that was an interesting one. That was a fun time this past summer in 2024 where we had to go and tackle that. But hats off to the team for pulling it off. And I know we see people enjoying it now. And we've gotten many comments from you in the audience, thanking us for making that decision and, bringing Docker to the masses on TrueNAS. So good call. Other ones though, hard ones. It's interesting. So of course, fast dedupe going into ZFS, that was a big effort. RAID Z expansion, for various reasons that took a long time. That was a big effort on the ZFS side. But, thinking more recently when we created Scale, porting FreeBSD compatible NFS v4 ACLs to Linux, that was a challenge just because we had to do kernel work, ZFS work. We wanted it to be seamless for migration, which means keeping the same on disk format, all that good stuff. So that was more than trivial. Let's put it that way. But honestly, even some of the things you think could be easy are actually kind of troublesome, though, depending on how many new surfaces they expose or how many potential for bugs or breakages there are. Or, I'll just pick on one. Even sometimes simple things like you'd think Cloud Sync with rclone, and then finding out not all providers are created equal. Things break in subtle ways. Not everyone, specifically follows the S3 standard properly.
Yeah.
So that can be challenging.
How about projecting into the future? Can you give us a little peek into, what the engineering team is working on, or maybe, you're bashing your heads off this particular brick wall and it's going to take a few more strikes before it starts to crumble?
Yeah, no doubt. So definitely there's some good stuff going into Goldeye, but I don't know if I would classify those as extremely difficult. They're important. Like we talked about the NVMe over TCP and Rocky support. That's going to be landing, but we'll say that's a B- for difficulty or something. I don't know. Okay. It's not that hard. 5 out of 10. But we do have a big feature we're working on that's probably going to take all of this year. It requires a lot of changes in ZFS first. So that's always hairy when you're doing file system work. And then there's a bunch of backend and UI work to do as well. And I don't really want to say what the feature is yet, because we've not broken that news and it's still in the early days. Let's see if we get a little further along and before we get folks excited for when it might land. But it's going to be a big one. So when we do get around to talking about it, I'll be happy to explain why that was such a difficult feature to do and all the things that it entailed.
Oh, it sounds like we could be looking at something on the scale of another, fast dedupe or RAID Z expansion going on in the background here then, Kris.
Bigger than that. Ooh, much bigger than that.
Bigger than that.
Bigger than those two. Yeah. It just requires a lot of work from all areas of the stack. It's going to need a lot of, RAID Z expansion, for example, there wasn't much UI work to do. You just a couple buttons. So you attach it, it goes, ZFS does its thing, middleware, same thing. It's mostly all on the ZFS side. This one's a combination of, I need a lot of ZFS functionality to land. I need a lot of backend functionality to land. And then I got to have a whole new UI to manage this functionality, which is going to be fairly intricate in and of itself. So a good feature. I think everyone's going to be excited and want it when it lands. But again, early days, this is one of those ones we look at and say, this is not a weeks or months feature. This is a years feature. One of those.
I'm already excited about this, and I can't wait until we're allowed to do a teaser on it, because I'm going to be grabbing the early builds and trying to play with this when this comes out for sure.
Oh, and people will be speculating now that we teased it. But anyway, like I said, you guys know we always have things like that cooking in the background. That's just how it goes.
Yeah, post your conspiracy theories about what we're developing in the comments section below. Let's hear some crazy ones. I want to hear what you guys think we're cooking up here. All right, on to the next.
That'll be amusing by itself. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, maybe we'll try to get this episode out early, and we can have a lot of really good ones coming in there. All right, so next question on is it's kind of somebody submitted a question based on somebody else's community forums post. So he says, I figured I'm just going to use the OP original poster's words here. It says this person might be a candidate for RAID Z expansion, or is cleaning out their files the only solution, and they're linking to a post where somebody says, hey, I'm showing my disk space usage right now. It is at 98.7% full on their pool. They got a 7.2 terabyte pool. They got about 7.18 used on it. They have just over 90 gigabytes free. He says, I know about that 80% rule, but how bad is this really? I don't notice any problems, but I don't know about any potential consequences I might be ignoring. He says, I am planning to upgrade right now and expand the capacity. I can't do it at the moment, so it kind of is what it is. I just want to know how bad this really is.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're in dangerous territory there.
yeah, you're kind of towing the line there with getting under that 100 gigs free. A lot of people talk about that 80% capacity as some sort of magic marker in ZFS that you should never cross, or your performance starts to crater and all kinds of horrible things happen. Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. With those cases, it's one of those generalizations again above that we talked about with, why we try to make things easy for the majority of people. 80% under normal circumstances is where a lot of users might start to see an impact, but it's very, very dependent on your use case and what you're doing. If you're really only just writing to, your pool with lots of sequential access, as we all like to say, somebody's storing every distro of Linux on there because everybody loves their Linux ISOs, and you're just reading back from them. You're never deleting anything. Or if you are, you're deleting like huge swaths, gigabytes at a time. It may not be as awful because there is still some space in there that ZFS can still find that's contiguous, and you can go back and write it without a whole lot of trouble and overhead.
Yeah.
You
when you
definitely
delete one of those large contiguous ISOs as well, you get a large contiguous spot back.
Exactly. You get lots of space for ZFS to say, hey, I like to write in big sequential streams. That's what hard drives especially do their best job at. The problem comes is if you're doing a lot of mixed I/O, you're doing lots of overwrites in place. If this was somebody doing, virtualization or database storage, they would have felt the pain a long time ago. So it's also the idea of, the idea of scale. This person has less than 100 gigs free and they're at 98.7%. If you had like a couple hundred terabytes or even a petabyte and you said, hey, I have, 90% free, I still have 100 terabytes. That's a much, much less of an issue because you can say, hey, I can write a whole lot into this space. I'm not causing my disks to seek all over the place to try and find spots to drop this in. There's big chunks of data. So, but definitely you are past not only that 80% kind of best practice warning threshold, you're into past the 96%, went from, was it best fit to first fit, or is it the other way around, first fit to best fit in the allocator? Yeah. I'm going to have to look it up and put it on the screen, correct myself. But you've changed that ZFS, storage pool allocator behavior for it to start being more aggressive with going, okay, we're running low on space. I need to find a way to pack this in as efficiently as possible. So that shift has already happened. And just from a pure total capacity free space, you're at 93 gigs free. If you have a snapshot in place and something runs away on a data set on top of it, you could consume those 93 gigs really fast. And no matter how much space, how big your pool is, what it's made out of, reaching that actual 100% is a major, major problem in a copy on write file system like ZFS. Because obviously, since we're copy on write, if we can't allocate space for a new copy, we can't write it. And even more so if you have a snapshot in there, because you'll want to try and add that new information and it will have nowhere to put it. Even the metadata updates can be a challenge there. You'll probably, in this scenario, you definitely want to start looking at pruning to try to get yourself back under probably that 95% threshold at the very minimum. But again, the user does say they are planning on expanding. Hopefully they're on Electric Eel or newer so they can do that, single disk RAID Z expansion, or they're going to plan a larger kind of forklift style upgrade and say, hey, I'm going to add a whole new VDEV. I'm going to, swap out every disk for the larger capacity, or I'm going to build a new pool and I'm just going to ZFS send everything over to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, I actually did my first RAID Z expansion this last week, and on the Fangtooth beta, it was fast. I think 6 hours.
Oh, wow.
I was all said and done. Very, very quick. It was good. So yes, please expand sooner rather than later. Free yourself up maybe a little space first. That makes me a little uncomfortable seeing that kind of capacity used, but yeah. Good luck.
Yeah, it's one of those things where at that point there's a reason that your whole, capacity bar is filled in red and the number is kind of screaming a warning at you. That's a bit more of something to pay attention to when you're up in the high 90s percentile of your disk space used.
Absolutely. Well, again, maybe follow up later. Let us know how it went. Hopefully you were able to expand and get out of this and give us your new graph that shows you're back down to like 60% used or something. I don't know how much you're going to
Absolutely.
expand, but that would be good. I love seeing the follow-ups on these kind of things.
Yeah, give yourself a little bit of breathing space there. Everybody will feel a lot safer, including yourself.
Sounds good. Okay. Well, thanks for sending in that question, Jonathan. We appreciate it. It was a good one. That's one, again, those topics where it's good we address because there's some good information out there and bad info, and we want to hopefully steer you well. Okay, so as we wrap up this episode, again, thanks for tuning in to the T3 podcast. As always, feel free to submit your questions to t3@truenas.com. Drop us a message in the comments section below. And don't forget to like the video, subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. Oh, I think we should mention too, as we wrap up here, we're on Spotify now. You can find us in more places.
We are on Spotify.
Yes. Yeah, I pulled it up in my car on the way in this morning. I was like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah. We will continue to expand to more platforms in the future.
Absolutely.
And thanks to all of our subscribers for helping us get over. We are officially over 1,000 subscribers on the channel. So thanks to everybody who is subscribing there. We couldn't have done this without you, and we appreciate all of your love and support.
Excellent. And we're looking forward to talking to you again next week. See you next time.